my thanks to Linda Wagner and to everyone who came out today. And also I want to thank Roger Whittaker for taping today's comments. And I'm going to talk to you, but I'm also going to talk to the people who will be watching this afterwards, because this is a very small turnout for a Chamber of Commerce lunch. In fact, since I've launched the book, which I'm very happy to say is a bestseller in BC right away, this is the smallest crowd that I've actually had to address. And I wanted to recognize Maggie Hathaway as the lone elected person who's here, so that's great. And that's a big, can't remember everybody.
I'm sorry, Maggie. It's okay.
And I want to thank my friends who've shown up, who normally wouldn't be here, but it's always good to have friends. So before I give you a reading from the book, I just wanted to take a minute to talk a little differently about what's happened since the book launched. And I want to talk about community, and I want to talk about family. And I want to do that because my experience since the book launched has been unbelievably positive, with it being number 2 on the bestseller list in a few days. That was amazing and unexpected, yay. And I didn't have a chance to celebrate that actually because of the impact that occurred on the family because of the response that you don't know about. So I want to talk about that. And I want to quote from a song that Paul Simon came out with years ago, The Boy in the Bubble. We live in an age of miracles and wonder, and we do. And one of the things that we deal with now, and that I deal with for the first time as an author, is social media. And so we'll talk a little bit about social media and the impact on community, real community, virtual community, and in many instances on the impact on family. And when I read from the book today, I'm actually picking a different section. I usually read from a chapter called Alone in the Crowd, where the Premier gives us a background view of what it was like for her after she became leader before she won the election. But today I'm going to read from the BC Rail chapter because it actually talks about the impact on family and community in the political arena. So what is social media? This book, Political Affairs, which I'm happy to say was a Canadian bestseller, which in Canada means 5,000 votes. Sounds really exciting, but I mean it is exciting, but you're never going to get rich being an author in Canada. And the second one, Daggers Unsheathed, both of these were before social media. So people were able to talk about them at meetings like this. I was able to travel around to universities. They're in the universities. There's still reference material right across Canada, so I'm happy about that. But when this book came out about a sitting premier, the response on social media was vicious. That's the only way that I can talk about what I've experienced. Now, I'm very happy that most of my family exist only in the real world. And what I mean by that is, unlike me, where I do spend a lot of time in social media, I don't think most of my family have Twitter accounts, which is great. They have Facebook pages, but they don't engage necessarily with the political people on Facebook. About a year ago, in Powell River, I started to be on the receiving end of social media attacks that were against me politically, but they were being done in a way that wasn't really political. For example, Pebble in the Pond Environmental Society, we did a campaign to try to save Lot 450's trees, and you might remember a little bit about that. And in that instance, social media was fantastic for getting the message out. When there was a mainstream media article, we were able to spread the word, and we developed a huge dynamic. But what people don't know, what Wendy knows because she experienced it, was what happened in this community with Pebble in the Pond, where we tried to raise money to pay for the wildlife consultant we'd hired, the pizza party that we'd sponsored for the volunteers, who went out and found the bird's nest, which actually helped us save some of the trees. And that was that in some stores in the town, our donation jars were being hidden. And there was a negative word-of-mouth campaign that was also being spread on social media. Don't give any money to Pebble in the Pond. And what you may not know is that we were very happy to have a donation from Sign Up Right, came into Pebble in the Pond to help us pay for the legal fees because we hired a lawyer to help us actually document some of the things that need to be done. And there was a letter writing and an email and a social media campaign trying to get the people who wrote us that check to give the money back. They demanded that Pebble in the Pond didn't deserve that money, and they wanted us to be accountable. They wanted the money to come back and go to a group of people who actually weren't even in incorporated society. And so there's one person, I won't name him, if he was here and I'd asked his permission, I'm sure he'd be happy to say it, but his inbox and his phone, they did not stop with messages saying, you got to get that money back from Powell and Pond. So that was the first instance, and that's in Powell River. Then the second instance was one, as a sheep farmer, I'm very connected to groundwater. And when I was elected, I was constantly campaigning about the need to protect our groundwater and prevent it from being commoditized, so we wouldn't end up being vulnerable to international market forces on water when it came to groundwater. And what that means is every time we signed a trade deal, whether it was the free trade agreement or NAFTA, now we've got the TPP, we were very lucky. The original deal was negotiated so that all water in Canada was captured under these trade agreements, which meant, let's say, if we had a license on Powell Lake or Duck Lake or somewhere like that, and we started shipping, and it was connected to groundwater as a source, we can't turn off the tap. That's what exists today, by the way. Our licensing agreements where we're selling water, we can't turn off the tap, even if we have a domestic need. But groundwater was exempted. So as a farmer with wells, and we irrigate and water our sheep with the wells, we need to know that if somebody set up something next door and they were selling water, that they wouldn't have priority over our water over us. And that just makes sense, right? We want to make sure the people who are producing the food can water the fields or water their sheep or whatever. So anyway, I got involved in this campaign, and I just did it. I didn't even mean to do it. I did it through my Facebook page and put a note up. Well, it ended up with something like 21,000 shares. Now that's social media. What that means is 21,000 separate accounts shared it, and if they have 200 to 1,000 to 2,000 friends, just multiply that. And also, people took pictures of my post and shared the pictures on Reddit, on Twitter. So overnight, and they translated it into French because there was a similar debate in Quebec. So I was sitting on my sheep farm, I just put a little rant up on my Facebook page, and for the next 3 weeks I was doing media interviews about the need to protect groundwater. That's fine, right? That's a good thing. But what happened is, the very same people who had been attacking me through Pebble in the Pond on the forestry, now they came after me on groundwater, but they expanded it, and they captured my husband. And they said, well, this guy's getting paid $12,500 a month because he's friends with the premier, and somehow they connected my need to protect groundwater to his advocacy for jobs in British Columbia and said it has to do with fracking. And it was just, they just made it up. But they made it up, and it became a post. And a couple of agencies that exist where you can't really find out who the people are, it's just a name on social media, they started spreading this. And so this social media campaign started that not only went after me and my credibility, but went after my husband and in his position and his credibility. So let me just state for the record, what does my husband do? He actually works for the government, and his job is to make sure that British Columbian jobs and British Columbian companies, like those that are members of the Chamber of Commerce, benefit through procurement and hiring through if LNG as it develops, and actually every other resource sector. In fact, in Nanaimo, he must have ended up advocating for about 150 jobs that are related to the harbor development. Doesn't have anything to do with LNG. But his job, his mandate, is to make sure that money goes into the pockets of British Columbians when investment comes into BC. It's specific to LNG, but he does it for everything. That's what he does. That's not what you read that he does, because he doesn't talk in the media. What you read that he does is effectively advocate for the destruction of BC's groundwater by contaminating it, coming soon to a neighborhood near you. So that's social media. So then what happened? Next, that was the second campaign. The third campaign actually involved my son, who's here today. Some of you might have read about him. Kaz was involved in something that I won't get into, because I know the justice system will deal with things, and then we'll all be very happy, and then I'll be happy to talk about what really happened. But my son was targeted in a way where his name and my name were put into national headlines, and it was all alleged to be politically corrupt. And we dealt with that right through the winter, and as it came out, it was announced that I was writing a book about Premier Christy Clark. There was this tinge. Yeah, but she's a terrible mother, and her son is a terrible person, so they're just terrible together. So we dealt with that through the winter and the spring. And I couldn't be more proud of my son, by the way, because after what he went through last year, which is unprecedented to my knowledge in Canadian history, he moved to Powell River, went to VIU, and got a straight 4.0 GPA, in his university transfer, and he's just, I mean, he's doing very well, and he'll have his own story to tell later. But anyway, so then the book comes out. So what happens when the book comes out? Before it came out, in the Legislative Assembly of British Columbia, Mike Farnworth, who was elected in 1991 when I was elected, who was effectively a colleague MLA, who served as a cabinet minister for the NDP government, stood up in the Legislative Assembly and accused me of a conflict of interest when he knew that it couldn't possibly exist. And he knew I can't sue him if he says it in the legislature. So that's what I had to put up, and then it was, but she's the biographer for the Premier. Look at her, she's getting paid. So let me state something for the record. First of all, I know we're thin on the ground here, and I had already heard ahead of time that there wouldn't be a lot of people in the room with me. But as I said before, I'm always happy for friends. And messages need to be spread, whether it's 5 people, 10 people, 15 people. I've learned over the years, the truth will always out. And I don't even mind the negative campaigns, because at the end of the day, I can only write a book about it. But having said that, I will tell you one thing. Not only have I never been in any conflict of interest of any kind, and I'm not crooked, and I'm not corrupt. I haven't received a penny for this book. The other 2 books I actually got in advance, but I didn't ask for an advance for this one because I wanted to see what it would do first. And also, it's kind of nice to think, well, once the sales have come in 3 months, then I'll find out what I get. I haven't received anything from Christy Clark. The Sheepskin Project, which is where I met Wendy Pearson, which was a fantastic local project, brought $500,000 into Powell River, employed 6 people, including myself. I volunteered for 6 months to put it together, 3 months afterwards to clean it up, was not over budget, because you cannot be over budget. And the first time the Premier of British Columbia heard about it was when the NDP raised it in the Legislative Assembly. So that's just a little bit of a difference between reality and what you're going to hear about. And I want to talk about it here because Powell River is my hometown. I've been here for 20 years, so I beat you by 5. And that means that for those who've been here generationally, I'm still a newcomer. But the first time I ever saw Powell River, I just fell in love with it. It's the most beautiful place I've ever seen. And as Linda mentioned, I'm born in Calcutta. I have traveled the world. So when I say this place is unique and it's paradise, I speak from considerable experience of visiting a lot of places that people tell me, oh, you're going to love it. It's the best place in the world. And they haven't been to Powell River. But what do we have here? We have people who can come from all over the world to go to lobber sports, or go to a symphony, or go to a canoe route, or maybe hike in the most beautiful mountains, or go to the ocean, go fishing, go to the lakes. Whatever you want in Powell River, you can raise your family here and be safe. But Powell River, as a community, is responsible to everybody else in the community. And what that means is, if all of us believe that this community is about sticking up for each other and standing together, there are no exceptions. I will not take you on because I don't agree with the politics. And if I've helped someone get elected in this community, and then later I disagree with their politics, I'm not going to spread slander about that person. I'm not going to suddenly dig up things that happened a few years ago and twist them. And if I'm organizing a peace rally, I'm not going to turn around and spread gossip about people behind their back who think that that's acceptable. So what I want to tell you at this chamber meeting, and through Roger's assistance, through the video, to the people who'll be watching, probably more people will watch the video than are in this room even, I want to say that I'm very optimistic about our future collectively, because we're at the beginning of social media. It didn't exist 10 years ago when I wrote my other 2 books. And the majority of people, especially in Canada, are good people and they're honest people, and they don't like the negativity. They don't trust it. They may not want to invite it on themselves by speaking out or engaging or confronting, but they're going to start to tune it out, and they're going to go and support the people who are being positive. So what I will say to you is it's very important to be positive, and that's what led to me writing this book. Because about a year ago, I actually made the decision to write this book because of the Yoga on Burrard event. And you may or may not have heard about it up in Powell River, you know. But if you watch the news at all, you would hear people. And because on my Facebook, I have almost 5,000 people who've added me over the years, and another 1,500 or so who follow me. So I have a lot of reach. And I get to see on my news feed a wide variety of comments. I have a lot of Aboriginal Facebook friends, a lot of political people, all political stripes, and many people who are not political at all. So I was watching this develop, and I was really shocked that people were so angry. And then there was this rage, and then there was an ugliness to it. And because I was able to watch it from some distance, I wanted to know more about it. I wanted to know what led to a Facebook page where 988 people had agreed to attend an event to murder the premier, which was an actual event. And I was the person who got that page taken down and reported as a hate crime and made sure the Vancouver police investigated it from my sheep farm in Powell River. And why did I do that? Because in my family, the one word that we were never allowed to use was hate. From the time we were little, we were always told, if we said, oh, I hate that. We were told, no, you do not hate, you dislike. And our children have grown up with that. They're not allowed to use that word. And that word conjures up very negative energy, and it's a powerful word. But social media uses it a lot. And when I saw that rise up, I thought, I need to know more, I need to understand this dynamic. And so, I'm a 6th generation social justice activist, and I can name all of those who went before me in this Tyabji family, and I'm proud of all of them, but I'm the first one in Canada. And I seem to have no off button, just like a border collie has to chase sheep. If there's something bad, oh, let me see if I can help. So that's what this book is about. I'm just going to read you very quickly, and then I'm happy to do questions and answers. About BC Rail, and the reason I want to read this is because of what's happened in the last couple of weeks. And when I started to write this book, the one thing that I even associated with Christy Clark was BC Rail. The scandal about BC Rail, and I fully expected that I would uncover how she was involved in the sale of BC Rail. And I'm open to whatever. It was a journey that I was on. And everybody I talked to when I asked also associated her with BC Rail. So this is from that chapter. And Mark Marison, who was her husband at the time. They have a son named Hamish. Mark Marison provides a good insight into what happened on a human level when the BC Rail story touched his young family. It was a morning, just after Christmas, and my mom was heading back to Ontario. I was about to give her a ride to the airport. Hamish opened the door to the cops. He was 2.5. That was when Mark's plans for the day changed dramatically. He was shocked to find that the police were there to talk to him about BC Rail. Mark describes himself as having been raised, in his Dutch Christian tradition, to be innately respectful of authority in these kinds of situations, and he was very nervous. He immediately prepared to do exactly what he was asked. Christy was not so agreeable, and her ferocious side came out. Christy was furious, he says, remembering that the angrier she got, the more he tried to keep the peace. I was really nice to them, but she was right in their face. She asked them if they'd already asked BCTV to show up. This question was a reference to one of the most dramatic scenes in BC political history, where BCTV was on the scene when the RCMP showed up at Premier Glenn Clark's house to question him about documents, and the BC public was able to watch the story unfold on the evening news. The scene itself was an interesting parallel because the police had showed up to question Mark about documents, and later news stories reported there was a warrant with allegations of criminal activity. The cops knew she was deputy premier. They were coming for me and showed up with a letter saying that I was not under investigation. They had no warrant. They wanted some information about some folks. The information they wanted was political, and the folks they were interested in were David Bassey and Bob Verk, both of whom were staff with the Campbell government and had also been active in the federal Liberal leadership campaign for Paul Martin, which had just concluded, with Martin winning the leadership and becoming Prime Minister of Canada. Eric Bornman was also active in the Martin campaign. The police wanted documents or emails that may have connected them all on an allegation of selling influence. The police told Marison that he was not allowed to share the letter they'd given him, which said he wasn't implicated in the investigation with anyone other than his lawyer. He asked, "Can I share with the Prime Minister's Chief of Staff?" He was a lawyer. Marison convinced them it was necessary, and they said okay immediately. At this time, I was the volunteer campaign chair for the federal Liberals in BC. Although we weren't yet in an election, Martin had just become leader, so I agreed to cooperate if I could share the letter to save my job. The allegations the police were investigating were that Eric Bornman, a consultant, was getting information for clients through Bassey and Verk and offering them jobs in Ottawa in return. The cops wanted to know how this job recruitment process worked. Marison took time to explain the federal recruitment process in order to prove the allegations were false. Marison knew that Bornman would not promise jobs, and did not have the authority to give anyone a job anyway. As a campaign worker, he could legitimately submit names for consideration because it is actually a necessary standard practice after a successful leadership campaign. New leaders build their own teams out of the best campaign volunteers. Key workers like Marison and Bornman were supposed to send in names, but submitting a name didn't guarantee anything. If their profile showed they had potential, then there was a rigorous RCMP security check before anyone was hired. The cops said they didn't know that. That's when I started to get really nervous. Did these RCMP officers have any idea what they were doing? Marison searched his computer for the emails he'd sent about the job application process, found them, and then made a point to state the qualifications of the people whose names were submitted. He gave the police what they requested. They had a few other questions, and then they gave him a copy of a draft press release for reasons that were unclear to Mark. Perhaps they felt bad, and they just wanted us to be able to prepare for what was coming next. Scanning the headline quickly, I said, "I think you've given me the wrong one. The press release is about drugs and organized crime." The police said, "No, it's the right one. Read further." That's when I knew that the shit was really going to hit the fan, said Mark. That was day one of almost 10 years of controversy. The next few weeks were a very intense time, and the uneasy alliance of the BC Liberals with federal Liberals in BC came into play immediately in terms of who would take the fall for the controversy. Marison laughs as he remembers just how starkly the lines were drawn between his role with Martin and his wife's role with Campbell. We were heading to vacation in Mexico the day after the cops arrived, and in the cab on the way to the airport, Martin Brown, Premier Gordon Campbell's chief of staff, was on the phone with Christie, trying to frame the BC Rail issue as a federal Liberal issue, and Scott Reid, Martin's communications director from the Prime Minister's office, was on the phone with me trying to make this a BC Liberal issue. When the BC Rail story broke in 2003, it quickly found Marison and Clark, even thousands of kilometers away. While on holiday in Mexico, I had to deal with the issue every day, including reviewing all the clippings that were faxed to us from Christie's office. It is pretty hard to wade through full media coverage of yourself, painting you as a criminal. I had to spend a couple of hours every day in the business center responding to media while Hamish and Christie were trying to have fun at the beach. So I'm just giving you that as a snippet of what it would be like if your 2.5-year-old opens the door and the cops are there. Your wife's the deputy premier, and for the next 10 years, you have to read about being a criminal. And I can tell you that one thing that really surprised me when I finished my research, Christie Clark, Mark Marison, and Bruce Clark had nothing to do with BC Rail. Nothing. And I actually had a chance to ask her. I had 4 separate interviews with the Premier, which was very generous of her. Although the first one I didn't actually get to sit down with her until I'd written the first 15 chapters of the book. So that was kind of funny. But I think it was the second or third one, and I was leaving, and I never, at any point when I was writing the book, indicated to her where I was going with the narrative. Because she said, if I can't have any input, I don't want to know. And I said, that's fine, you can't have any input. She said, ultimately, I trust you. She'd read my first 2 books, and she is somebody who for 20 years and more has had to know that you can pick up the newspaper anytime. Someone's going to write something about you. So anyway, and I asked her, I said, why is your name so woven into the BC Rail story? And she looked at me and she said, I have no idea. Well, I have an idea. I have a really good idea. And I think if you read the chapter, you'll find out that it's because somebody was really good at communicating her name in that story. And that's what politics can be all about. So in British Columbia, we have a particularly divisive and negative political environment. But it doesn't have to be that way. It really doesn't, because ultimately our democracy belongs to all of us as voters. And I've known Christie Clark since we were both 18-year-old idealistic young Liberals volunteering for a party that everybody said would never go anywhere. And I know who she is, and I know she's not perfect, and I know that she's a lot tougher than people give her credit for, because most people wouldn't have survived what she's been through and what she's going through. And so the book is ultimately a fair treatment of her, and that's what you won't find anywhere else. So anyway, so just ready to take some questions from anyone who has some questions, and anything is for game. Anybody? Isabel? You don't have a question? Oh, wow. Okay, well, that's great. Well, I just want to leave you with one thought then, and that is, if you've ever seen the Best Exotic Marigold Hotel, right? It's very funny. There's a great line in there that people love to quote, right? In the end, everything will be all right. And if things are not all right, it is not yet the end. That's right. Anyway, thank you for those who came, and I hope if you do get a chance to read the book, I would love to hear from you. Thank you.